our second edition of today's Calling It How I See It Sports Pod. It's time for our second Twitter space. Sorry for the little delay there. We're trying to get all the technology issues figured out, but so is life. So now really excited to be joined by Jack Johnson of the Locked On Royals podcast. You can check all that out in his bio. Give both of our YouTubes and our other socials a follow. I'll get my link tree up there. Jack, it's a big day, and it's a big day for dudes named Jack today. Apparently, you're in some impressive company right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's spelled a little bit differently.
That's
Certainly
true.
a big day for all Jacks, but the more important one, of course, being Jack Caglione. You know, what a surprise it was last night when we get the breaking news from Jeff Passan that Caglione would be on his way to St. Louis to make his major league debut. And it's not the way that I don't believe JJ Picollo wanted it to happen. I think the perfect scenario would have been him joining this team when they were on a hot stretch and the offense was thriving. The reality is they're not. And I'm not sure how much longer they could have waited for the offense to get going before giving him the call up, of course. So the time is now. They need an impact bat in the middle of their lineup, and it's too early to pull off a trade, mainly because not a lot of teams are going to be as aggressive on June 1st. So who's the best option in your system? Well, it'll be Jack Caglione.
No doubt. Let's talk a little bit about what we should expect from him in the immediate future. You know, I think everybody understands that he's going to come in wielding the kind of power that really nobody else on this team has. You know, Salvi's 30 to 40 homer days, unfortunately, appear to be well beyond him. Bobby Witt, honestly, as much as he's not off to the start we hoped he would be this year, I've always kind of wondered if his homer totals might peak in his first couple of years. I think 30 is probably top of the line of what we ought to expect for him, especially as, he's in as much of a table setting as he is a run producing role in that number 2 spot. So, of course, Caglione is probably definitely going to bring in the biggest power presence they have, and maybe the biggest one they've had since, the 2019 to 21 days when Jorge Soler was here and Salvi was at the peak of his home run hitting powers. Is that, we'll get into his outfield defense and everything else, but is that sufficient right now? If he just comes in and he's kind of, in terms of his overall performance, on par with this lineup because he's getting his feet under him, but he's hitting the home runs that nobody else is that sufficient? Or do you think we ought to expect him to be a more complete hitter in terms of, calling this a successful start to his career, that is?
I would say that the Royals would be a bit foolish in calling him up if the only specialty or the only attribute to his skill set was putting the ball over the fence. There are other parts to his game that are really underrated, and we know there's always going to be the 450-foot home run potential. That is always going to be a part of his game. But what they wanted to see in Double-A and what they wanted to see in Triple-A was plate coverage and his ability to spit on pitches that are outside the zone. Because what he's going to see now that he didn't see in Double-A or didn't see in Triple-A is guys that just have powerful stuff. He's not going to get 98 on the black or 92 mile an hour sliders down in the way in Double-A or Triple-A. And if he did see that, it was a one-off. It certainly wasn't consistent enough. And so what he did in Double-A and Triple-A is show the maturity at the plate that the Royals needed to see. But definitely the most intriguing aspect of his game is the power. The Royals are dead last in all of baseball in home runs, and he now becomes by far and away their best power bat. He gives them the best chance to change the game on one swing. Bobby Witt Jr., of course, can do that, but he's not known for power alone. He is known as a 5-tool caliber player, whereas Jack Caglione, when he was scouted, when he was evaluated by everybody in baseball, it was the 80 grade power that stood out and the 70 grade fastball. He's not pitching, of course, but at the plate, that's what you're looking for. But it would be foolish, as I said, for the Royals to only pay attention to that and say that he's ready. If he was hitting 250 in Triple-A and 230 in Double-A with 10 or 15 home runs, but striking out at a 40-45% clip, that's only going to get worse at the big league level. So to see the maturity, his ability to go the other way, hit the ball the other way with authority, go gap to gap, and show that he can handle a corner outfield spot, at least somewhat okay. those were all aspects they needed to see in Northwest Arkansas and in Omaha before they could make this big decision.
Now, what if what you described there of what that's not what we were seeing in the minors, and that wouldn't give you much call, or it shouldn't give you much call to bring him up. But everybody agrees this is the biggest jump you ever make from any minor league level to another. The biggest jump is going to the major leagues. What if that is his game? I think David Lesky put it, in terms of like the bar for upgrading this lineup is so low that Caglione could hit 200 if he gets 400 plate appearances the rest of this year. But if he hits 20 homers, he could still lead the team. If that's what he gives you, at least for the next couple months, maybe even for this first 2/3 of the year that he's starting his career with, that would you consider that a successful rookie campaign?
It would certainly depend on what that 200 looks like. If you are a 200 to 205 hitter, but you have 20 home runs, you drive in 60 to 65, you walk at a 10 to 11% clip and strike out only, let's say, 23% of the time, I could see that as being an above league average bat, right? You want to get a slightly above a 100 OPS plus, and I believe with those totals, you could be looking at somebody that would be right around that if the power was there and the walk rate was there. But to hit 200, man, I would say I'd be a little bit disappointed because even though that would be an upgrade over what they've had in right field and what they've had at second base, that shouldn't be the goal with a prospect like him. Don't get it twisted and don't make any mistake. They are calling him up here to be one of the top bats in the lineup. They don't make this move if they only feel he can hit 200. If that was the case, then there's no need to rush it. If you make it to the big leagues after 40 to 50 minor league games, you have clearly proven to the front office that you can be an impact player right now. And so that's why I feel, yes, the bar is incredibly low, but they're shooting for him to be a top 3, top 4 hitter in this lineup, and not just for this year, but for years to come.
No doubt. You kind of alluded to it. The timeline definitely moved up. I think it's hard to get back into the mindsets we used to be in, but if we go back to like maybe spring training, pre-spring training, I think only maybe a few people just threw it out there that maybe he could make it this year just because there's a trend recently of guys making it a little quicker. Then he has the spring training he had, so people are thinking like, oh, okay, well, it probably will be this year. We'll just have to figure out exactly when. Then he starts off tearing the cover off the ball in Double A, and the Royals offense starts off really slow. And we're like, well, okay, definitely going to be this year. It's just a matter of how long can we wait, and then how much time does he need at Triple A? And then, we kind of just keep going from there and there. And then I still think most of us were a little surprised, even if only by a couple weeks at this point, of how quickly he came up. But regardless, the timeline definitely moved up. I think the answer is probably both, but I'm curious what you think drove that timeline more. Did he force their hand, or did their crappy hand force their hand, and they feel they owe something to this pitching staff that they can't squander it? Where do you think I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a spectrum. Where do you think the JJ Piccolo and his guys' minds were at when determining how and when to make this decision?
Well, and all the times that we've spoken with JJ Piccolo, the message was they didn't want to rush him. They didn't want to put him in a spot where he is deemed the savior. And he would reiterate it over and over again that the best time to call up a prospect is when you're playing well. And if you're an offensive player, it's when the offense is killing it. And if you're a pitcher, it's when the rotation is pitching like the way the Royals are right now, where it just feels pretty easy to step into the role. You don't feel that type of pressure. They just haven't given any opportunity, or they haven't had that type of opportunity. They haven't given the front office any reason to believe that opportunity is coming. Look, Jack Caglione is going to be looked at as a savior by many people. That is just undeniable considering the status that he has, the type of power that he has. But it's also going to come down to what the other guys in the lineup do around him. And to me, this misconception has been, it's a bad time to bring him up because, the offense isn't playing well and you're doing it too early. I mean, he's barely had any time. In my opinion, next to him coming up when this team's won 7 in a row or the offense is averaging north of 5 runs a game, this is a good time to bring him up so he can be the spark, but also so that he has time to adapt to big league pitching. In my opinion, the worst time to bring him up would be July or August when the team is struggling, or if they are. And then you say, okay, you've got a month and a half to get this going. That's not a lot of time for a 22-year-old prospect to get rolling at the plate. With 102 games to go, there are going to be ups, there are going to be downs, but there is time to develop as a hitter. And then you're hoping by August and September, he's comfortable and he is viewed as, who knows, maybe the second best hitter in this lineup behind Bobby Wood Jr. And that's why I felt, if you're going to call him up, there's no need to wait until July or August or to the second half after you make a deadline move. You might be playing well at that point. You might be playing poorly at that point, but you're not leaving a lot of time for a hitter to truly develop. To me, this gives him time to develop. It's unfair to put that type of pressure on a 22-year-old, but we also got to acknowledge that there's still pressure on Bobby Witt Jr. There's still pressure on Vinny Pasquantino and Salvador Perez and Jonathan India. It's not just him and him alone, but it got to that point with JJ Picollo where you couldn't wait anymore. We're 60 games in. They're 2 games out of the top wild card spot. They're 8 games back of Detroit. You wait 20 to 30 more games. What if you just don't have the offense going at all in those 20 or 30 games and the rotation regresses? Then you might be looking at being 6 or 7 games out of a playoff spot. And now you're really scrambling and trying to get Jack Caglione going. I feel this is a fine time to do it. I always thought it was going to be on a homestand, but the next best time to do it would be, 3 hours down the road to St. Louis for the I-70 series.
What about the pitching staff and all that? You sort of touched on it, but I'm curious, I feel like that might be what put the pressure on them in addition to Caglione's performance because, they sort of, we thought, kind of pitched out over their skis last year, and we were hoping the offense could pick up some slack. Well, now we're learning maybe the offense was out over its skis, which there were some underlying numbers, we talked about that could have suggested that. And the pitching between a combination of guys staying as good or better than we expected and guys like Noah Cameron coming up and filling in, plus, some guys coming up from the minors and kicking ass in the bullpen, the pitching staff has really been what's kept this team afloat. Do you think their performance in kind of a roundabout way might have driven this timeline a little bit too? Because I don't think they'd be here, or I don't think they'd have this urgency if the pitching had, let's say, just regressed a little bit, maybe not as much as the offense, but if this team were already 7 games back, as they would be with even an average pitching staff, you probably wouldn't have that urgency. So you think maybe there's some roundabout pressure from the pitchers kind of going hey, we're doing our job. Let's have a sense of urgency here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there was some urgency to give a little extra help for this pitching staff. What's been so infuriating about the offense is their inability to hit home runs. I mean, home runs aren't everything in baseball. We found out firsthand in 2014 that you could be a bottom team in all of baseball and hitting home runs and still win the American League and get to the World Series and go to Game 7. We also can acknowledge that baseball's changed and the long ball is a valued part of it. And like I said, the frustrating part about this offense is yesterday they trailed 1-0 for 6 innings. And it took 3 singles, or we all knew it would take 3 singles to tie up the game. They don't have anybody in that lineup, at least right now, that can do damage on one pitch and tie the game or flip the game on its ear. And Jack Caglione gives them that ability. That's undeniable at this point. And that's without having one big league at bat. The power is truly indescribable. And this pitching staff, they've been fantastic. And the Royals are not looking at this as they're going to regress at some point and you got to get things going. But it is to take advantage of these times where Chris Bubich throws 7 innings of 1-run ball, when Noah Cameron throws 6 shutout innings, when Seth Lugo and Reagan's are on, or when Walker throws 7 shutout innings. You go around baseball. If you get a starter to throw 6 or 7 shutout innings, that should be an automatic win for your team. That there should have been 3 or 4 runs scratched across where you are not sweating it out in the final 3 innings. And it's been a sweated out type of game almost every time one of those starters has gone 6 or 7 shutout innings. And does Jack Caglione solve that? Likely not, because one man can't do it all. but it gives them a different type of hitter in the lineup. And, you're asking, what was maybe the push? What led the front office to do this? I believe it's looking at Bobby Witt Jr. and his, 5 or 6 home runs, Salvador Perez and his 4 home runs. That's not cutting it in the middle of your order. You need more pop. And if Jack Caglione can be the pop in the middle of the order, then everybody maybe can relax a little bit and know that he is the one that is there to drive the ball out of the yard, where everybody else should be setting him up to drive the ball out of the yard. And then we can maybe see the power trickle down to other people, to Salvi, to Vinny, to Bobby, even to guys like Drew Waters and Michael Massey. They've got some power in their bat. We just haven't seen it in 2025.
It certainly continues the aggressive trend internally that the front office has been on. We saw him call up John Rave and get rid of Hunter Renfroe. Nick Lofton got a chance. Kevin Biggio gets sent out. Some of the stuff on the pitching side of things was more forced upon them by injury, but they've, leaned into guys with little to no track records and gotten a lot of good results in the bullpen. Bolin, Cruz, Sisk, guys like that. Certainly, when it comes to transactionality and being willing to give other guys a chance from within, of course, I didn't even talk about Drew Waters for MJ Melendez. Certainly that it continues that trend that we're seeing. Where do you think this comes down on we've all talked about trades most of the season. Of course, you got to see who becomes available, who's actually hot and cold at the actual deadline. Then you got to figure out how Caglione mixes into the outfield so you know exactly where your needs are. But you think this actually, especially if it actually works and they start to pick it up a little bit, do they use the success of their internal moves to say, hey, see, we don't need to give up resources to upgrade, we can do it all from within? Or does this embolden them to continue being transactional because they're having success with it?
On the pitching side of things, I don't believe they need to be as aggressive in looking for an extra starter or an extra bullpen arm. But in my opinion, if they do not make a move at the deadline or shortly before that for a bat, they're not getting to October. They're not going to have the lineup or the horses to be able to get it done. And that's if Jack Caglione turns into a big time piece. It will help this lineup. It will make them far more respectable than they are right now. But to get deep into October, to get your foot in the door and put yourself in a good position, you need more than just one bat. They're going to need another one out there. But when it comes to the pitching side of things, this is why I'm all right trading away some pitchers in the system. I'm all right trading away bullpen arms that might be blocked or they're just in the crowded bullpen, because you have to feel confident you can recreate that. I go back to the trade they made for John Schreiber in February. They traded David Sandlin, a top prospect in the system and someone that a lot of people were high on. Yep. But you can make that trade if you are confident you can recreate a David Sandlin. And that's how I view this bullpen, right? Moving forward, if they trade Steven Cruz, who's been really good, you got to feel confident that you can pick up that production somewhere else. Maybe that's Jonathan Bolin. Or if you trade Jonathan Bolin, you got to feel confident that somebody else in AAA can become Jonathan Bolin. It's what we saw too with Hunter Harvey going on the IL. Hunter Harvey going on the IL, who was going to step up? Well, it was Steven Cruz, and he's been incredibly valuable. So that's what I feel with the pitching staff. And Brian Sweeney, Zach Bove, Mitch Stetter, I'm all right trading away pieces of the pitching staff, whether that be in AAA or AA or maybe in the bullpen. I'm not sold on trading a rotation arm. I'm not high on trading Lorenzen or Noah Cameron, because you need that depth going into the postseason. But they're going to need another bat. And to me, to get that bat, you got to trade pitching. And I feel the Royals have an abundance of arms they could trade to someone who would be gladly willing to trade away a bat for some arms or multiple arms.
Yeah, and part of the reason that they have such a need for a bat, and part of the reason that Jack Caglione is going to be playing at least a fair amount of outfield in the majors, is because the Royals just haven't developed outfielders recently. Gavin Cross, a first-round pick from a couple years ago, having a nightmare season in Northwest Arkansas. Tyler Gentry, not quite as high of a pick, but a guy that some people really had some hopes for, had a good season a couple years ago. He's really having a hard time down in Omaha. There just isn't a lot there. And, of course, MJ Melendez, his story is well documented. There just isn't a lot there still in terms of everyday outfield fixtures from within. And I do get, if there's one thing, I don't mind that Caglione's performance might have forced the timeline. I support them, saying, hey, we can't squander this pitching staff. If there's one thing that actually does get under my skin, even no matter how he does, it's that we're having to force a guy who's gone from pitcher to pitcher two-way player, first baseman to the outfield, hope it works because we got nothing. Similar to kind of how they, handled Jonathan India when they acquired him, that they just don't seem to be able to develop an outfielder. That's one of the main reasons that they're having this offensive issue. Of course, Vinny not being himself, Salvador Perez maybe actually the age is catching up with him. Other things are factored in, but the lack of ability to develop an outfielder is causing both their offensive issues right now and has caused them, even as we're happy with Jack Caglione, to have to put another thing on his plate. So let's say that goes reasonably well. The reports are decent in the very limited sample size in double and triple A. Let's say he's, at least within spitting distance of average on all the different metrics you can use, outs above average, his zone, his catch probabilities. Let's say he's close enough to average for it to work for the short term. Do the Royals actually, this is an opinion question. So in your mind, do they get to use that as an evidence that like, hey, we can develop outfielders, or do you view this purely as a short-term Band-Aid, him playing in the outfield, that is?
I mean, it could be used as, they can develop outfielders. But I would give some pushback to it. I mean, we've seen now really post Lorenzo Cain, the inability for the Royals to develop a true everyday outfielder that could be an impact player. I mean, it's not to take anything away from what Kyle Isbell has done or what Drew Waters has done this year. But, since Lorenzo Cain, the Royals have not had that great of an outfield. And when they've had a productive outfielder, it's usually been, as you said, somebody playing out of position. Whit Merrifield in some of the years where he was hitting over 300 and, was obviously the team's best player. He was playing right field, but he was a utility guy just put over in right field because you had Nicky Lopez and Adalberto Mondesi. So with Jack Caglione, I'm not sure you could count that as developing an outfielder. If he stays there, then I guess you can make the argument because he barely spent any time as a first baseman in the system, right? If he comes up to Kansas City, he's a right fielder and that's all he does, then okay, I could hear you out a little bit. But this to me feels like they're putting him in right field because it is the middle of the season and Vinny Pasquantino's at first base. Long term, I believe he's good enough defensively to be this team's first baseman of the future. Vinny could still be a first baseman in DH because we know he's not going to the outfield. But look at the way Matt Quatraro handles his lineups. I mean, there's very few guys that are, pigeonholed into one spot. Michael Garcia came up as a shortstop. Then he played third. Then he played second. Then he was back to third. Then he's in center field. Bobby Witt Jr., even though he was a third baseman under Mike Matheny, he and Vinny, and I wouldn't even say Salvi, probably more so Kyle Isbell, the only guys that don't move around. Everybody else is moving around. So to have that ability to play both first base and right field and left field for that matter, it gives the team flexibility. And that's how I view his career. I'm sure that while Vinny's there, he'll be a right fielder. But we're also going to see games where he's at first base and Vinny DHs. We got to also bring up that we're coming down to the final years of Salvador Perez. So that's going to open up a very clear and obvious DH spot because it does hurt at times where you would have to DH Vinny because that means Salvi would have to play catcher. And I feel that if you DH'd him more, you might get more out of it because he's getting to that point where, at his age, you don't want him catching 140, 150 games a year. You want him probably DHing a lot, but who knows how long the Royals will be willing to do that with both Jack and Vinny in the line.
So if Caglione, let's say he does, like I said, take to right field a little bit. We talked about the narrative on the development. Contract statuses are also another thing. If Salvi's in the last year of that big contract, there's a mutual option. Frankly, I think it's like a $15 million mutual option. That number even looks a little high based on his performance right now. But I would expect they might come to terms on a smaller deal to bring him back for a final year or two. So all that stuff is going to affect that. But I think maybe the bigger picture question would be, for what we see on the field, if Jack does acquit himself reasonably well in the corner outfield, does that alleviate the pressure for the Royals to need to go out and get another outfielder that they didn't do this past offseason? Or would you still view that as a top priority, even if he does show that he can do it?
Yeah, I mean, they're still going to need another bat. That's
Right.
just
That's what it all comes back to, doesn't it?
yeah. I mean, it's unfortunately the truth of this team. I mean, you can take Jack Caglione and put him in this lineup, and he may thrive. To me, it's still not enough. And I don't blame the Royals for not shelling out a lot of money on an outfielder in the offseason, because a lot of the guys they were interested in haven't done anything. I mean,
Right. Yep.
Anthony Santander has been one of the 10 worst hitters in all of baseball. And he's on
Jock Peterson was actually Jock Peterson has literally been worse than MJ Melendez.
Yeah, and he
it just
as well. Jurickson Profar is suspended. So there wasn't that perfect solution. But I've also felt really since the beginning of March that their I wouldn't say lack of getting someone, but their inability to land someone in the offseason made me believe that if they're in it by the deadline, they are going to go get somebody because teams are going to be more willing to trade. And for the Royals, that should be the case even if the offense is playing well. That's the time to go and strike and add another piece to this lineup because you have to anticipate some regression. A lot of the guys you're counting on have not been everyday players before. Drew Waters, somebody that has been so impressive since being called up. He's never been an everyday player like he is right now. And as great as he's been, we don't know what he's going to look like in June, July, and August. And, Michael Garcia, as high as I am on him, is he going to be a 310, 315 hitter for the entirety of the season? Those are all things you have to prepare for. And that's why I feel that if Jack Caglione comes up and he's a 275 hitter and he's OPSing at 900 or 850, like really doing well. Add to it. Still go be aggressive because you're going to run into the same spot that you did last year where, yes, you are reliant on your pitching staff to take you deep into October. But you lost to the Yankees last year in the ALDS, not because of your pitching staff. I know that Reagan's only went 4 innings in 1 start and Lugo didn't make it that deep into the game, and neither did Waka. You saw in that series that when push came to shove, the Yankees just had more hitters. They had more guys that could work the count, that could really put together a threatening inning, and the Royals just didn't. They needed to string together multiple hits and maybe get all of their runs in 1 inning and then rely on the pitching staff to carry them the rest of the way. If you are going to build a legitimate threat in October, to get past Detroit, to get past New York, to get past Houston, and to get past Cleveland, you need a threatening lineup. And Jack Caglione playing at a high level, same with Bobby, same with Vinny, same with India, Garcia, Salvi. Add another name to that. Add another bat so that when you are facing those teams, if you're in a 2-0 hole, if you're down 3-1, there's a lot of guys in the lineup that can start a rally. So to answer your question, it's not going to be enough. Even if Jack Caglione is hot at the big league level, they're going to need another bat to take them the extra mile.
Last thing here before we let you go, we're talking to Jack Johnson of the Locked On Royals podcast. Dave and I kind of had a fun discussion. I want to get your 2 cents on it. I was telling him how pumped I'm feeling about. I got a early 50-1 bet in on Chris Bubich to win the Cy Young, so I'm feeling pretty good about that one. How do you? Because, a lot of people are like, ooh, is Jack Caglione going to, compete for Rookie of the Year? Because, if he comes up and never comes back down, he should end up with around 400 plate appearances. Then we got talking about Noah Cameron. I kind of realized as I start looking more into the stats, Cameron actually, not based on any site I've looked at, doesn't really appear to have much Cy Young odds yet probably because he hasn't thrown enough innings. Depending on the site you look at, he's sitting at around 50-1 for American League Rookie of the Year. Let's just say I can promise you that the Royals will have the AL Rookie of the Year award winner in 2025. Who you think it might be? Let's say neither one of them ever go back to the minors again. You think it's more likely to be Caglione or Cameron? Cameron's got the head start. Sometimes pitchers can actually, like Luis Gil of the Yankees last year, the pitchers that weren't highly touted can kind of separate themselves. Who would you think is, who would you like the odds on more, Caglione or Cameron for Rookie of the Year this year?
It would be Jack Caglione. I mean, that's not to slight what Noah Cameron has done. He's been very, very impressive. The unfortunate reality of his situation is that he would be the number 5 starter in a really good rotation. Chris Bubich is stealing the spotlight. You have Cole Reagans, when he's pitching well, stealing the spotlight. Same with Waka. Same with Lugo, where if Caglione comes up and does play well, you are viewing him as the guy that turned around the offense and made them a better team. And the name alone pops. Right? Noah Cameron is still incredibly underrated. He's not a household name just yet. Jack Caglione, before he's even stepped foot in the batter's box at Busch Stadium, he is a household name to a lot of baseball fans. He was that way coming out of Florida. I mean, if you were a college baseball fan, you knew of Jack Caglione. And I just believe the ceiling for both of these guys is far greater for Caglione, because you are talking about somebody that will be up there with Aaron Judge and Shohei Ohtani of pure raw power. If he hits 25 bombs in 102 games and drives in 75 or 80 and OPS is at 800 or 850, and he's got an OPS plus north of 130, I don't believe it would be really that close. Of course, it'll matter what some of these other guys are doing, but to me, they would factor in a lot, and I feel Jack Caglione would have the edge by quite a bit. Not to say Noah Cameron couldn't get votes, posting a 2-point-something ERA and 20-plus starts, but Jack Caglione, being the guy that he is, what opportunity he now possesses going into this St. Louis series, it just is far greater than what Noah Cameron can do. Because you're looking at somebody that could be a true number 5 hole hitter and the biggest power threat of a lineup as a rookie, compared to a guy that is unfortunately just the number 4, number 5 starter in a really good rotation.
Right. Man, I was mostly asking the question to have fun, but the more you talk about it and the more I keep thinking it in context, there's going to be a broader conversation to be had about the hardware that the Royals are accumulating. They had the second place finisher in the MVP vote last year. They had the second and fourth place finishers in the Cy Young. And now there's a real argument to be had that they're going to have a different guy in the top few, if not potentially. I mean, right now he might be on track to win the damn thing. He's got the best ERA in the league, a totally different pitcher, and then somebody to be in the Rookie of the Year conversation. They're accumulating a pretty impressive amount of hardware, individual hardware, that is. So
absolutely, yeah, they've got an opportunity to really rack up the awards. But knowing this team a little bit and what these guys say after every single game, the focus is getting back to the postseason. I mean, if you ask Chris Bubich right now about Cy Young votes or battling out with Tarek Skubal, he'd tell you, it's not worrisome to me. I'm not focused on that. Or if Bobby Witt Jr. is concerned that he's well behind Aaron Judge for MVP or the MVP race, he'd say that's just not something I'm worried about right now. Even Carlos Estevez, like save man of the year, right? The closer of the year. He'd probably tell you that's not on my mind right now. What's on my mind is trying to save as many games as possible and keep this team in postseason contention, and really hope that we can climb back into the AL Central race at the top.
Absolutely. All right. Great stuff, Jack. Let's do this again in a couple weeks, and apparently hopefully we'll have a lot of Jacks from Jack to talk about with Jack, if you follow me there.
I do. It's always a blast to hop on here, Blake, and glad to join anytime.
Sounds good. Jack Johnson, the Locked On Royals pod here on the Calling It How I See It Sports Podcast.